Okay, hello everyone. My name is Bodhi and this is my presentation for my minor project at QUT in Brisbane, Australia. I'm a library science major and my chosen topic concerned gaming and gamification in libraries. It seems to be quite a diverse and meaty concept, and it was one that was personally interesting to me, which is why I decided to do it. Now, the basic research question that I decided to go with to direct my research was, does gaming have a place in the library? This might seem a bit broad, but given that the concept had an awful lot of applications, it was easy to get distracted by the content and attendant issues, I thought that keeping it broad was the way to go. It also gave me a good combination of freedom to examine a number of different aspects of gaming and gamification in libraries, as well as giving me something to answer so that I'd know when I was done. Now, after a bit of a false start for the proposal stage of the project, I settled on relating most of my findings through a blog. I updated it more or less weekly. Sometimes I did a couple of posts a week, and sometimes it took longer than that because there was quite a bit of research involved. I was also able to post some personal reflections on my findings up from time to time. The blog allowed people to give me feedback, as well as providing a venue for my supervisor to be able to view what I was doing at their leisure and provide feedback as needed. And at the time of writing this presentation, the blog had been up for about 6 weeks, and it had attracted just over 1,300 page views over about 10 posts. And this was interesting because it's a fairly high amount of traffic for a blog to get without any publicity. About the only place that I advertised the blog was on my Twitter feed whenever I put up a new post. Now, before I get into the nuts and bolts of what I actually did on the blog, I'll just quickly explain the difference between gaming and gamification. There is a bit of a difference, and because of that I often referred to them separately and sometimes even interchangeably, and that probably gets a bit confusing. So gamification is the application of gaming mechanics like leaderboards and scores, rewards and things like that to non-gaming concepts like learning and shopping, driving and other forms of consumption to increase engagement and loyalty. The best example I can think of is flybys in Australia. They're a good example of gamification. The more you spend, the more points you get, and the bigger the rewards you can take. Gamification's a marketing tool, and since 2010 it's been a bit of a buzzword for everyone. Opinions are also divided on the concept. Game designers tend to either love it or hate it, it seems. Gaming is the application of gaming concepts for entertainment. It's fairly simple. We've all been kids and we've all played games in one form or another. Gaming doesn't really rely on any other concepts. It's a much more sort of complete concept than gamification is. And as far as opinions go, everyone likes gaming for entertainment value, but not everyone sees the worth in it. Now, the majority of the blog posts that I did were taken up with conducting a modified SWOT analysis on the concept of gaming in libraries. Now, the SWOT in SWOT Analysis stands for Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities and Threats, and it's a way of figuring out how a concept interacts with its environment and how various aspects of it interact with each other. I actually began discussing the strengths and weaknesses of gaming in a more general way before conceiving of the analysis as a whole, so as a result the analysis is taken from the point of view of gaming and gamification as opposed to the library, which probably would have been ideal for it. I'll run through each of those coloured blocks now in a bit more detail. So there's a few strengths that gaming and gamification can bring to an organisation if they're done right. Immersion relates to giving the players a full experience. Bringing a story relates to the overall narrative that punctuates a player's experience and gives them something to sink their figurative teeth into. Extrinsic and intrinsic motivation form a balance that gives the player rewards, either that which they create themselves or that which is given to them from an outside source. Knowing when not to gamify is crucial because it keeps gamification as a tool to utilise effectively instead of just another useless thing to do for its own sake. And making it fun also came through in a lot of the research I did. It's really what gaming is all about, and it turns out that it's a major motivator. Gaming also has a number of weaknesses that can come out in its implementation as well. Not respecting the players and tacked on content go hand in hand as things that make gamification feel hackneyed and cheap. Gamifying everything and timing it badly make the concept a chore and take the shine off the parts that should be gamified. It's sort of like a guitar that you hit every string on for every note of every song. It just ends up not meaning anything if it's done all the time. Organisation-centered design serves the organisation first and customers second, which isn't really what gamification should be, if only because it relies so heavily on user engagement to be successful. And taking the wrong thing and running with it also came through in the research pretty strongly, and it basically involves implementing rules over the earlier mentioned narrative that makes gaming so popular. In regards to the environment of the library, the three main opportunities that it offers in order to allow gamification to flourish are similarity of purpose and form. Both involve large amounts of information delivered to a user base that actively engages with that information on its own terms. And this is one of the major opportunities that gaming presents to libraries. They're not really all that dissimilar once you scratch the surface. It's mostly just cosmetic differences that make them seem wildly different. There's also a built-in user base. Basically, libraries aren't new concepts in themselves, and they offer an already engaged patronage for games to find an audience in. Finally, there's presence and diversity of information. It turns out that games use a lot of stimulus material, and libraries appear to have quite a lot of that on hand as storehouses of knowledge. It's also that information presence that's part of the common ground that games and libraries share, and it represents a vast amount of untapped potential for libraries. The two biggest threats that the library environment offer to gamification come in the form of these two problems here. The frivolity problem involves gamification and gaming being regarded as frivolous and pointless, like something kids do to kill time. And this is a problem because it doesn't allow the other benefits of gaming to be taken seriously. The panacea problem is the opposite of the frivolity problem, where the concept of gaming is seen as being able to cure any engagement issue that the library has, and this goes hand in hand with knowing when not to gamify and gamifying everything, as I've discussed before. So the overall outcome of the SWOT analysis showed that gaming and libraries have a lot to offer each other. For want of a better term, libraries are an untapped resource for gaming concepts, and properly implemented gamification is a low-risk concept with excellent payoff for libraries. Libraries and games are also united in purpose, which is essentially information dispersal. It's just that one is quite a bit more formalised than the other. The weaknesses and threats that gaming represents to the library scene appear to be seated in people's perception of gaming. The medium's subjectivity seems to be both its greatest strength and weakness. Now, there's a couple of other aspects of gaming in libraries that I examined in the blog, and one of those was the considerations that libraries need to be mindful of when they implement the concept. This is a fairly broad list, and it made for one of the longest blog posts that I put up on the blog. It clocked in at about 2,500 words. And of all of these, I think that scope at the bottom is probably the most important, as it both defines the rest and is defined by them. And it's a good example of the two-way nature that a lot of the concepts that I explored had throughout the term. For example, if you don't have much time or space, you might decide that you're only able to have a small scope for a gamification project. On the other hand, if you decide that you only want a small scope gamification project, you might only allocate one staff member and a little tiny bit of money to it, that sort of thing. Now, one of the most important reflections that I had throughout the course of this assignment was on the nature of story, the narrative structure that underpins a surprising amount of the concepts we engage in everyday life. It seemed to me that a lot of gamification was rules minus a story or any element of overarching narrative in the process of engaging that creates meaning in itself. Now, this is one of the main things that seems attractive to gamers about gaming. And in the gaming industry, the story takes precedence, with the rules just acting as a contact point for the player to interact with it. It's very easy to do a story badly, and even the gaming industry struggles with it from time to time. It's also one of the most powerful aspects of gaming, though, and as I've said, it's one of the most attractive things about the concept. It creates a need for players to want to discover things for themselves. So after all of that, I set down some recommendations to round out this phase of my research, and this will also be continuing after this project. First, I made some practical recommendations for libraries intending to gamify themselves. Researching the concept with a view to executing it all well should be paramount to any information organization. Games rely on seeming effortless when they're actually pretty complicated, so getting a solid base of knowledge is very important. Thinking creatively about your resources also helps to mitigate misuse of them, and also helps get you into the headspace you need to engage with an inherently free-form medium like gaming. Losing the fear of making mistakes also helps you get creative and might help open the organization up to possibilities with the medium. Even gaming companies make mistakes occasionally, and their whole industry relies on their gaming. The libraries doesn't, so we shouldn't have that fear either. The other recommendations I made were made and directed at a bit of a wider audience, both within the gaming industry and the library industry as well. I think we need to understand that gaming isn't frivolous and pointless, and we also need to take ourselves less seriously. There really seemed to be this feeling that gaming was beneath libraries and it needed to justify its inclusion in a library setting. All I could really see this doing was losing out on a massive piece of multi-billion-dollar pie, which isn't to be sneezed at in the Google age. The two industries need to play nice together as well. They need to understand that they do have a couple of key differences, and I think this would go a long way to help the concept of gaming penetrate the environment of the library. And finally, I think we need to be mindful that by definition informal learning can't really be controlled, and that games pretty firmly are informal learning spaces. We shouldn't be trying to subsume the medium because we're used to control. We need to let it do its own thing and give it a bit of guidance and explore the untapped potential that real gaming, and not just gamification, can bring to the library scene. So I think I've fairly comprehensively answered whether or not gaming and gamification have a place in libraries. They definitely do. We've just got to be careful about how we go about implementing them. So if you've got any questions, just leave them in the comments, I guess. Thank you very much.